I am a figure from the past, as some of you will remember me and many of you won't. I come from the Howard government. Remember us? Or as somebody said the other day, missing us yet? In any case, we took an approach to policy and to politics which we would like to describe as rational. We would have seen ourselves as descendants of the Enlightenment movement, so we look at the facts. So when it came to issues pertaining to the Middle East as the foreign minister, I was pretty interested in the facts. So when my department came to me with recommendations, my department being DFAT, with recommendations on how to vote on General Assembly resolutions in the UN, which had some bearing on Israel. Are there many resolutions that have a bearing on Israel? I mean, last year, I think I'm right in saying 1/3 of the resolutions of the UN General Assembly were condemnation of Israel in one form or another. 1/3 of them. Do you think there might be some anti-Semitism around? Anyway, my department would come to me with recommendations for how to vote. And they invariably said to me, Minister, we should vote in good company. What good company meant voting with the EU, voting with some of our regional neighbours and so on. And that normally meant abstain. And I used to say to them, well, let's look at the wording of this resolution. Does it really make sense? I mean, we abstain. That means we don't know what we think. And so I recall one particular resolution, which was to refer Israel's building of the security barrier, or as they like to call it, the wall, to the International Court of Justice. I said to the department, would this be good for the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on this? And we know what the advisory opinion is going to be. Will it create harmony? Will it help build relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians? No, Minister, no. No, none of those things. No, it's not going to have any real effect. But it's not a good idea. Of course it's not a good idea. But we should abstain. And I said to them, well, we won't abstain. We'll vote against it. Because it's just a bad idea. It's a foolish thing to do, to support this resolution. I want Australia to be known as a country which tells the truth. And the truth is, this is a bad idea. The Israelis are entitled to defend themselves from bombers and terrorists and suicide bombers coming across from East Jerusalem into West Jerusalem. They're entitled to protect themselves, surely. Yes, Minister, they are entitled. Well, then let's not refer this to the International Court of Justice. The ambassador rang me, the ambassador to the UN, I won't say who he was, rang me hours before the vote, and he said, Minister, do you mind if we abstain? Because otherwise we'll be in a tiny minority. I said, yes, I do mind. We are not going to abstain. We are going to vote against this. He rang me after the vote. He says, it's so embarrassing, Minister. There were only 6 countries that voted against this resolution. Us, the Americans, the Israelis, what is it? The magnificent land of the Federated States of Micronesia. Something like Guatemala, one of those Central American republics. Good countries, good people. Let's not knock them. So there were 6 of us anyway. And he said, it's so embarrassing, Minister. I said, it's not embarrassing. It's great that we did the right thing. And we didn't just support Israel. We didn't just support Israel because, you know, we love Jews or we love Israel or whatever it is. We supported Israel because it was irrational not to. And it wasn't in Australia's interest to encourage behaviour in this world which would gradually unravel the stability and security of people generally, and in particular of the Western Alliance and our civilization. I'll come back to that. So years passed, and we get to the 7th of October. I have a look at what has happened, honestly. I can't watch the videos. I can't do that. But I look at the facts of what has happened, and I think to myself, if I were the leader of Hamas, or one of the leaders of Hamas, why would have I done this? Because Israel has a huge defense force. It's a nuclear weapons state, let's be honest. What do I think if I go and slaughter and brutalize people in a way that wouldn't have seen much of that since medieval times? If I do that, what do I think? I'm the leader of Hamas, or one of the leaders of Hamas. What do I think the Israelis will do? What do I think their reaction will be? I bloody well know what their reaction will be. I know what their reaction will be. Huge anger, and the IDF will come in and come after us. I know that. So why would I do it? Why would I do it? Well, I think about this, and I think they have two motives. One of them is domestic, as in within the Palestinian community. Because the problem for people who are extremists like them, and these people, by the way, are not people who think Israel has a right to exist. They are not people with whom the Israeli government can negotiate a two-state solution. These are people absolutely committed to the total destruction of Israel. The total destruction of Israel. So what am I planning? What am I doing here? Well, I'm the Hamas person. Number one, I want to destroy the Abraham Accords and the negotiations that Israel was conducting with the Saudis at that time. I want to destroy the relationship between Israel and Arab nations. So I don't think the timing was a coincidence. Clearly wasn't. I don't think the Iranians chose the timing. They're great supporters, of course, the Iranians. But I think from intelligence sources, I think the Iranians were surprised by the timing of the attack. But I think Hamas was driven by trying to create chaos to destroy the negotiations between Israel and the Saudis and undermine the Abraham Accords, because they want to destroy Israel. And so Israeli diplomacy with the Arab world is the last thing they want. And the second thing is that as the Hamas, you know who the Green Prince is. People like that who have been involved in Hamas will tell you they always benefit from chaos. So they were driven not just to destroy Israel's relations with Arab states, but to destroy international support for Israel. And the way the international community has fallen for this, and I'm going to use this word a bit later as well, it's shameful. It's shameful the way the international community has fallen for this. That Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself from people who are determined to destroy the country and to destroy the people and to kill Jewish people. That Israel should be signing up to a ceasefire with these people to allow them, the Hamas people, to continue to prosper. No, Israel should not do that. Israel should not. So if I am, instead of being the Hamas leader, a slightly more comfortable position if I were the Prime Minister of Israel. I had this discussion with William Hague last week. William Hague used to be the British Foreign Secretary. He's like me, he was the opposition leader, brackets, not very good at it. Hopefully none of you remember that, or in his case as well. But he was the Foreign Secretary, Foreign Minister, and a good friend of mine. I said to him, what would you do? Because he's being a bit critical of the Israelis. I said, well, what would you do if you were the Prime Minister of Israel and you were woken up early in the morning on the 7th of October and you were told what was happening and you were subsequently shown the videos and you saw what happened, what would you do? And he said, I would have been doing this and doing that with Abbas and others in the Palestinian Authority. Well, good luck with that. But he said, it's a fair point. I guess I would have sent in the army. And he said to me, what would you have done? I said, it wouldn't have been a complicated decision for me. It wouldn't have been complicated. I would have sent in the Israeli Defense Force with the simple objective of destroying Hamas military activity forever. Forever. So some of you have been, has the Napoleon film started in Melbourne yet? Yes, I think it has. Some of you will have been to see the film of Napoleon. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm a great fan of Napoleon. And Napoleon was, that's another debate for another time. By the way, Napoleon was a friend of the Jewish people. I don't know, you probably don't know that. But he liberated Jewish people from many of the communities that he so-called liberated, invaded, of course. Napoleon was the man who said, war is, these are not his exact words, war is a terrible business and many people die in war. So if you are going to go to war, go in fast, go in hard and get it over and done with as quickly and as successfully as you possibly can, because by doing that you will in the end save lives, not cost lives. And that's what the Israelis must do now. I hate to say this to you, I think they should forget Antonio Guterres. They should forget criticism for the international community. They should forget the United Nations General Assembly, and they should concentrate really hard on their simple task at the moment, which is to destroy the people who want to destroy them. This, by the way, this is an existential, you hear that word a lot. This is an existential challenge to Israel and to the Jewish people. What is it? 40% of Jewish people live in Israel. 40%, something like that, of all the Jews in the world live in Israel. This is an existential threat to them, and they just have to prosecute this war, of course, minimizing the civilian casualties as best they can, but prosecute this war ruthlessly, effectively, but quickly. And the more there are calls for ceasefires, the more there are pauses and, humanitarian interventions and so on, so-called humanitarian. A humanitarian pause, by the way, humanitarian meaning be humane to the Palestinians, forget the Jews. Think about that. Humanitarian pauses, the more of those there are, the longer it is going to take to get rid of Hamas, if it's possible at all. So Israel just has to concentrate, and Israel's friends have to support them in concentrating on getting that task over and done with quickly. I was appalled. None of you are probably agreeing with me here. I was appalled when the Secretary General of the UN, who has lived as the Secretary General of the UN through any number of crises, wars, attacks on civilians and so on, in all parts of the world, in Central Asia, in Nagorno-Karabakh recently, 100,000 Armenians were driven out by the army of Uzbekistan. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, thousands upon thousands of people, including women and children, are killed every year. There are endless civil wars in other parts of the world, but apparently the Secretary General of the United Nations doesn't think it's worth triggering Article 99 of the UN Charter to demand a humanitarian pause or a humanitarian ceasefire in any of those conflicts, only the one that involves Gaza. It's the only one. It's the only, you want to think about that. And there isn't anti-Semitism in the UN. I think there might be. I think there might be. And don't you forget that. Anyway, my point, if I leave one point with you, is that Israel, I mean, it's not a nice thing to say in a way. Israel just has to be ruthless, do the job, get the job done, and then that's fine. Happy to sit around and talk about some medium-term political settlement. But until the job is done, there will never be any hope. Understand that. I mean, if you follow Guterres and you know, people like that in the UN, if you followed their advice, you'd have a ceasefire now. What are Hamas about? What do these people think? Hamas will be back again. They'll be firing their rockets, they'll be sending their paragliders and so on across back into Israel. Of course they will. I mean, don't be silly. Of course they will. And we'll be back to where we started. And how many lives will then be lost if we keep this cycle of violence going? So they've got to be done over now. And then when they've been done over, we can start talking about new arrangements. And I know people like the Americans, the British and so on are behind the scenes working very quietly within the Palestinian territories to try to shore up some moderate opinion. I'm not sure about President Abbas. I'm not sure whether he is so moderate, but anyway, trying to find some moderate opinion and get the help of the moderate Arab states to try to, beat some sense into the Palestinians and put them into some negotiating position. But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen for as long as Hamas run Gaza. So I have only one other point to make, because I've spoken for far too long and you've sat here all night listening to speech after speech, by the way, as I've wrestled with Australian Airlines. Remember the Howard government? Remember how planes used to leave on time? Only if you're old will you remember the time when planes used to leave on time. Anyway, I agree that this is a civilizational issue, because I want to just talk briefly about Australia. I've been in England not all of the time, but most of the time that this has been going on since the 7th of October. And this has been one of the periods where my country has got a lot of publicity internationally. And it's quite unusual that, and sometimes it's bushfires or somebody gets eaten by a shark. That usually makes the headlines over there in the UK, because they're gloomy people. They like the stories of people being eaten by sharks. But this, and that's sad, of course, but don't get me wrong. But this is something else. This is something else about Australia. Australia got huge publicity when there was, on the 8th or 9th, forgotten which day it was, of October, there was chanting outside the Sydney Opera House, "Gas the Jews." This was on BBC News for everybody in the UK to see. This is my country. In my country, people are chanting, and they're said to be Australians. These people, most of whom no doubt have Australian passports and Australian citizenship, they are part of our country, and they're chanting "Gas the Jews." This makes world news. And then the other one was right here in Melbourne. It also made news. The families of hostages, Israeli hostages, come to Melbourne and they walk into their hotel and there is a demonstration with dolls with red paint on. You've all seen it. I've seen this on TV in London. Demonstrating with banners and so on in a Melbourne hotel, the Crown Plaza, right? Is that the hotel? Let's mention its name, because what would the manager have thought when all these demonstrators came into the hotel? You know what I would have thought? I would have thought these people were trespassing on private property. And I would have called in the police and said, these trespassers need to be out. And I would have had a leitmotif for doing that, and it would have appalled me if in my country people demonstrated in that sort of way against people suffering the pain of their family members being taken hostage. It would appall me. But anyway, it made the news. And so Australia stands as a country where anti-Semitism is rife. That, of course, Australia is not alone in being one of the countries for which Israel has sent out a travel advisory warning people there could be a bit of anti-Semitism around. This country has brought shame on itself. This country has brought shame on itself since the 7th of October, and we should all hang our heads in shame that we have tolerated that. The demonstrations here, I mean, they're the same in the UK. The demonstrations here, these people chanting from the river to the sea. Have you ever thought of asking some of these people, by the way, this is just entre nous, have you ever thought of asking some of these people on the demonstration, you know when you say from the river to the sea, what river are you talking about? I reckon 50% of them wouldn't have a clue that it's the River Jordan. And the sea, some of them would know it was the Mediterranean. But of course, what they're calling for is the elimination of the state of Israel. The elimination of the state of Israel. It's a great Jewish saying, so where do we go? I mean, where do they all go? All these Jews in Israel, 7 million out of 9 million people, 80% or so of the population. Where are they supposed to go? Just run that by me. And they think they might go to Europe. But a lot of them, Europe hasn't always been very friendly to Jews, has it? And what about the ones who are in the Middle East, as I wrote in a column the other day, in that column you were referring to? I think in the 1900s, something like 30% of the population of Baghdad was Jewish. I know that sort of famous Sassoon family came from Iraq. Siegfried Sassoon and so on. They didn't seem to be terribly popular in the Arab world and in Gaza. How many Jews live in Gaza? You don't live in Gaza if you're a Jew. You die in Gaza. So where are these 7 million Jews meant to go? I mean, they don't think about this, and they don't care. Why is that? It comes out of our schools and universities. This is this sort of critical theory, critical race theory, critical theory, postmodernism, and so on. I don't think you should underestimate any of this and the role of the universities in this. When I was thinking about what I would say, I must have been going on over time now, but when I was thinking about what I would say to you tonight, I was thinking about Napoleon and, if I were the Prime Minister of Israel, like Napoleon, I'd do him in. That's what I'd do to Hamas. I'd just do him in. And when I was thinking about critical theory, and when I was thinking about postmodernism, I was thinking about something really interesting. It was the testimony of those 3 university presidents in America, Harvard, MIT, and Penn State, those 3 presidents of universities before a congressional committee. And these were asked, these 3, all women, were asked, not that that's relevant, I mean, I'm not saying that. Men would have been given, trust me, men would have given exactly the same answers from university. So they were asked, is calling for the genocide of Jews against your university policy? And they said, each one of them, I don't know if you've seen this, each one of them said, it depends on the context. And I'm thinking, calling for the genocide of Jews depends on the context? It depends, they said. What does that mean? It depends on whether they're actually about to commit an act of genocide. You can call for genocide, that's all right, as long as you don't commit genocide. It's not all right. It's not all right. And one of them has resigned, the woman from Penn State. And the other 2 should resign as well. They should resign. And if they don't resign, they should be sacked. And the reason I think they should be sacked, and the reason I think they should be sacked is clear. But what they have done is open the door for you and everybody to see what is happening in our universities, in America, in the UK, and let's be honest, right here. It is this whole critical theory concept where the world is divided into 2. Everything is divided and seen it's a sort of Marxist concept. Everything is seen in terms of conflict, of the oppressor and the oppressed. The colonialist is the oppressor. The colonized are the oppressed. People of colour are the oppressed. White people are the oppressors. They see the whole of the world in this incredibly simple and totally divisive way. And so they don't care about the human rights of the oppressors. They only care about the human rights of the oppressed. They don't care about discrimination against the so-called oppressors. They care about discrimination against the oppressed. Now, I agree with them. Why would we be in favour of discrimination against anybody? Isn't that the liberal, I mean small L liberal, I'd like to think big L liberal on a good day, but small L, isn't that the liberal, enlightenment-driven view of how the world will best work? It'll struggle by successfully. If we tolerate all sorts of points of view, we judge people on the content of their character, not the colour of their skin. As Martin Luther King famously said, if we ensure that we care for all people, regardless of their backgrounds. No, it's not their idea. Their idea is to set us against each other. And if you're Jewish, you have gone from the 1930s and 40s being the oppressed, having won, the Israelis having won wars against people who came in and tried to destroy their country, have won wars, they therefore have become the oppressors. And therefore it doesn't matter what happens to Jews because they're oppressors. We don't have to worry about their human rights. Their human rights don't exist. The human rights that exist are the rights of the people who are oppressed. That's apparently, in this context, the Palestinians. I think this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue. And I think so I must finish because I've gone way over time, haven't I? But I spent a long time coming here, I can tell you. And I know you're good people. I know you're good people. But I will finish by reiterating really, what has been said already. I think Jonathan Sacks, who some of you will have heard of, was the British chief rabbi. He's dead now. He was a huge figure, Jonathan Sacks. He was a wonderful person. And he used to say, one of his sayings was, well, you British people, and I say this to Australians as well, you Australian people, they go for the Jews and then they'll go for you. They'll go for the Jews and then they'll go for you. And bloody well, don't forget that if you're not Jewish. Don't forget that. When they're going for the Jews, you're next. You're next. And that is what these people are doing. They are breaking down our civilization. And this war, in this, well, I call it the Hamas war, since they started it. By the way, if you're calling for a ceasefire, there was a ceasefire. And on the 7th of October, Hamas ended the ceasefire. And we're supposed to agree to another ceasefire for them. No, I think not. No more ceasefires with Hamas. The point is, this is a civilizational struggle. This is a civilizational struggle, and we have to rally together. We have to rally together behind Israel, behind the Jewish people, and behind the liberal idea, small L liberal, the liberal idea of a civilized society. That is what we're dealing with here. This is not just a small war in the Middle East. This is a civilizational struggle. This is hugely important. So you are donating money to Israel, which, well, I don't know who in Israel is going to receive this money, but the Israeli Defense Force, I'm thinking of them. I mean, you know, some of their soldiers get killed and wounded. I'm thinking of them. They need all the help they can get, and they should get all the help that they can possibly get. And so do the Israeli people. The Israeli people need to know there are people around the world who will support them, not just Jews around the world, but there are people way, way, way beyond the Jewish community who will support them. So tonight is a really important night. And, you know, put your hands in your pockets and make sure you raise the money. Thank you.